Thrice at the huts of Fontenoy the English column failed, and twice the lines of St. Antoine the Dutch in vain assailed, for town and slope were filled with fort and flanking battery, and well they swept the English ranks and Dutch auxiliary. As vainly through the Barry's wood the British soldiers burst, the French artillery drove them back, diminished and dispersed. The bloody Duke of Cumberland beheld with anxious eye, and ordered up his last reserve, his latest chance to try. On Fontenoy, how fast his generals ride, and mustering come his chosen troops, like clouds at eventide. A GAA, welcome to Undercover Irish, and we started today with the first verse of Fontenoy, the poem written by Thomas Davis, something that links an Irish crest, a GAA crest, with a battle on foreign fields. Today on Undercover Irish, we're going to pull that thread and follow it all the way through to see how one leads to the other. A GAA. A GAA, in this podcast, we've touched on a number of things: language, Luimneach, place names, songs, ballads, things that are in our midst, that are around us, that we can touch and delve into and travel back through time and discover or rediscover stories and history that's there in plain sight but hidden if you don't know where to look for it. One of the things that I want to look at in today's podcast is the importance of a crest or a coat of arms or an emblem. Now, these are things that are important worldwide, but we're going to be looking at the Irish context. These things, we think about football jerseys, soccer jerseys, hurling, Gaelic, whatever it may be. They are about identity and belonging. They serve as a kind of a visual shorthand for community identity, whether it's a family, a county, a province, or an institution. Because remember, of course, families have coats of arms as well, clans have coats of arms as well. And in Ireland, names and language were, changed under colonisation. These emblems can sometimes offer like a continuity of identity beyond words. A crest says, this is who we are, and this is where we came from. So it's kind of like a survival of heritage through symbolism. Irish language and culture has obviously been suppressed and have been oppressed, but the symbols persist quietly. The harps, the wolves, the machtira, the castles, the saints. These are repositories of Irish heritage. They have pride in them, they have lineage in them, and they're an expression of place. Now, I can remember as a young sports supporter, I suppose, someone who followed a lot of sports when I was younger, becoming very interested, first of all, in the colours of the jerseys, the colours of the teams, coat of arms of the counties, and the stories that they told, because every single one of them had a different and unique story. I went from time to time trying to draw different crests and designing new jerseys. And I was fascinated with the symbolism of every inch of the jersey and every inch of the crest. And while obviously as a Cork supporter, I was primarily concerned with drawing the Cork coat of arms with the two castles and the River Lee and the boats floating into or sailing into Cork Harbour. One of the crests that I found always unique and always, I suppose, was always interested in was the Limerick crest, the crest of Cuimhnigh Luimneach. Because in the early 90s, my memory of it was that the Limerick crest was completely blank. It was completely white. And I had to look back over this to confirm my suspicions. But yeah, having looked through old programmes, the Limerick crest of the early 90s, the famous Shaw's jersey, was completely blank, completely white. So while all of the other counties in Ireland, indeed all the other clubs in Ireland, had a very distinctive crest that was very well thought out and rooted very deeply in symbolism, particular to that place or that club or that county. In the case of Limerick and Cuimhnigh Luimneach, their crest was very, very different. Completely white, completely blank. So the question in my head was, what's this about? And unfortunately, I haven't had a satisfactory answer on that just yet. Looking back at the 1970s, so Limerick won an All-Ireland in 1973. And on that jersey, the crest was blank. It was left blank. It was a white crest, like a shield with a white, just the colour white on it. No symbolism, no writing, nothing like that. And at the same time, other counties really didn't have a crest or a symbol. While they may have had a crest on writing or on the paper, it was unusual at the time to have crests on jerseys or emblems on jerseys. Really, that was something that only came about in the late 70s, the early 80s, and so on. The only reference I can find as to explanation around this crest is on boards.ie from a number of years ago, having researched it in the newspaper archives and so on. And a contributor to boards.ie said that he remembered asking a Limerick player in the early 90s the very question. His response at the time was that the crest was the shape of a heart and that the harp was left blank, and the onus was on each player to fill the heart on the pitch. And the writer claims that the player in question was Ger Hegarty. Now, that's the only theory I've come across, and I'm sure someone from Limerick or someone with knowledge of Limerick GAA history may be able to contact me and give me a little bit more on that. But it is a unique, if that's the case, it is a unique and an interesting approach to it, a blank crest that you have to fill with your heart on the pitch, because of course 9 times out of 10 the crest will be on the same side as your heart, as a sign of commitment, a sign of courage, a sign of complete loyalty to the cause. And the reason, of course, I mentioned the Limerick crest is because the current Limerick crest, the modern Limerick crest, is crucial to our story today. It's going to bring us through, it's going to guide us through, and it's going to teach us an awful lot on the way. So looking at the Limerick crest of today used by the GAA, which was designed back in, the modern version of it was designed back around about 2000. Dominating the background is King John's Castle, iconic medieval fortress overlooking the Shannon River. It was built by the Normans in the early 13th century, and it symbolises Limerick as a strategic power. You know, it's the role of, it's gateway to the city. It controls the Shannon, the longest river in Ireland, where as it enters towards the Shannon estuary. The River Shannon itself features on the map. It flows through the scene or through the crest, tying all of the symbols together. You know, it's a lifeline for trade, transport, culture, the Shannon as the longest river in Ireland. It symbolises flow, connection and resilience, and how Limerick kind of bridges between east and west, past and present, even north and south. In a sporting sense, the river kind of suggests a continuity kind of carrying forward generations of pride and passion. And of course, there's the hurley and the sliotar as well. They're placed kind of subtly. They link the history, the imagery of the modern world of Gaelic games. It kind of represents the county's passion in particular for hurling. And this evokes, I suppose, Limerick's long GAA history from early foundation years to the modern era of success. But while all of those elements of the Limerick crest are important, the most important thing for today's story are the Treaty Stone and the motto. In the foreground of the Limerick crest is the Treaty Stone. This is the symbol of the Treaty of Limerick from 1691, signed on a limestone block, which is said to have served as a table between two opposing generals. And of course, the motto, Cuimhnigh Limneach. Cuimhnigh Limneach, which means remember Limerick. In order to understand where we're going with this story here today, we have to understand what the Treaty Stone is about. So it's a rough block of limestone. It stands today on a pedestal across the River Shannon from King John's Castle. And according to local tradition, it's the table on which the Treaty of Limerick 1691 was signed. Now, this marked the end of what was called the Williamite War in Ireland. Today, it remains one of Limerick's most powerful landscapes, and it's a monument to memory. But let's look at what went on before and why it remains so important today. And let's look at the meaning of the slogan, Cuimhnigh Limneach. The Jacobite War was part of a larger European struggle for power, religion, monarchy. But in Ireland, it took a very deep local meaning. So it began after the Glorious Revolution that was back in 1688. Basically, King James II, he was a Catholic, was overthrown by his Protestant daughter Mary and her husband, William of Orange. So supporters of James were called Jacobites. That comes from Jacobus, which is Latin for James. And supporters of William and Mary were called Williamites. Now, in an Irish context, many Irish Catholics, they felt that James's return to power would represent a last hope to restore land, faith and political rights that they had lost over generations to English rule. So when he landed in Ireland in 1689, he was welcomed like as a potential liberator. So this is the 1600s, and this is kind of midway through the colonization of Ireland, or the imperial kind of colonization of Ireland. So many Irish Catholics see James as a last chance saloon to restore their right to land, which has been taken from them, to restore their political and economic and social power within their own country. So while it's a European war that's going on with lots and lots of other ingredients and contexts, which are obviously very important, in the Irish sense, it becomes a little bit of a precursor of green versus orange, with the, William of Orange literally coming on the scene at this time. There was battles which you'll have heard of during this war: the Siege of Derry, 1689, the Battle of Boyne, 1690, of course, the Battle of Aughrim, 1691. And of course, it follows through to the Siege of Limerick. The Siege of Limerick, 1691. And this is where the Treaty of Limerick was signed. Now, the treaty, crucially, promised political, religious freedom for Catholics. So, in the defeat of James, the defeat of the Jacobites, part of the treaty that was signed at Limerick promised a number of things to the losing side. So the Treaty of Limerick, the treaty stone that we see on the Limerick crest, it represents the end basically of the Siege of Limerick and the end of the Williamite War in Ireland. And basically there are two important parts to this. So it's negotiated after basically the victory of the Williamites who supported the Protestant King William over Jacobites who supported the Catholic King James II. But the treaty had two main parts. There was a military part and a civil part. So the military part would allow the Jacobite army, the losing army, to leave Ireland honourably, taking their weapons and their banners. And the soldiers could choose to join the French army, and around 12,000 actually did, join William's service, as in join the opposing side, or return home peacefully. It guaranteed safe passage and amnesty for those who accepted the terms. So that was the military side of it. And the 12,000 that did join the French army, obviously primarily a Catholic army, these were known as the Wild Geese. You may have heard of the Wild Geese before. Well, these were known as the Wild Geese. The second part of the treaty was the civil articles, so the parts that related to civil rights and people's rights in the wake of their loss in the war. Now, there was promised in the treaty religious freedom, property rights, and legal protection for Catholics who swore loyalty to William and Mary. Now, here's the thing. In practice, while the military side of it was largely honoured, so those fighting in the Jacobite army were allowed to leave and join the French army, they were allowed to return home peacefully. The civil side of things, it didn't take long before the promises were quickly broken, because the Irish Parliament at this time is controlled by what would later become the Protestant ascendancy. And in fact, within a few years, Catholics faced severe restrictions under penal laws. So what was bad before becomes even worse. And the penal laws may be a subject for a different podcast, but essentially the rights that were promised under the Treaty of Limerick were absolutely rode back upon 100% and more. The results of this was that the treaty ended the war, confirmed the Williamite control of Ireland. Limerick was spared destruction, but Ireland entered into an era of the Protestant ascendancy. The wild geese who left for France, they continued to fight abroad, and the Treaty Stone, where the agreement was traditionally said to be signed, became a symbol of broken promises and Irish endurance. So now we come to the slogan, Cuimhnigh Limneach. Cuimhnigh, remember, Limneach, remember Limerick. The treaty now became known as the Broken Treaty, the Broken Treaty Stone. And remember Limerick, Cuimhnigh Limerick, Cuimhnigh Limneach became a battle cry for the wild geese who left Ireland as a reminder of the treachery that had happened to their own nation at home, as a reminder that they could not trust the enemy. Cuimhnigh Limneach, remember Limerick, a slogan we see up until today on the crest of Luimneach. Now, the broken treaty or the Treaty Stone did not mark the end of the line for many of those Jacobite soldiers and their families who left Cork and Limerick, about 12,000 of them as part of the treaty's military terms. They formed an Irish Brigade within the French army. They built their own regiments like Dillon, Clare, Berwick, Lally. And Louis XIV, he was in charge of France at the time. He valued their experience. He saw them as assets against the English and English allies. And it wouldn't be long before they did what they did best, battle on behalf of the French. So there was the 9 Years' War, the War of Spanish Succession. We're talking about kind of the 1690s up to the 1710s. So they were in action at Italy, Flanders, and Irish generals like the Duke of Berwick, they gained high command within some of these battles. But deep inside of them, they always hoped to get revenge for what had happened and what had driven them from their own homeland. Now, you can imagine these soldiers would have been very keen to face their old enemy on the battlefield, and they would get their chance. So basically, a war called the War of Austrian Succession took place between 1740 and 1748. Now, it's a European-wide struggle, obviously, and France, led by King Louis XV, they fight basically a coalition including Britain, the Dutch Republic, and Austria. And the French army had about 50,000 men. They were under Marshal Maurice de Saxe. The Allied army, that would be the British, the Dutch, and the Austrians, they had about 60,000, and they fought under the Duke of Cumberland. But from an Irish perspective, that's not the most important thing. The most important thing is the Irish Brigade, and the Irish Brigade in the French army getting their opportunity to take the battlefield once more against British forces and to seize upon the opportunity to gain revenge for not just the Treaty of Limerick, but the things that had happened for hundreds of years within their homeland. And not alone would they get to play a part within the battle and within these battles, but in fact, at Fontenoy, they were crucial to the outcome of the battle. Basically, it resulted in a French victory. The Allies were forced to retreat, leaving thousands of casualties behind. Louis XV reportedly rode onto the battlefield after the fight to thank the Irish soldiers personally. The Irish Brigade's courage became legendary across Europe. This was an army of exiles defeating their former oppressors. For France, Fontenoy was one of its greatest 18th century victories. But importantly for us in Ireland and our history, it was a moral victory. It was a proof that the Irish courage endured even in exile. And all of this brings us back to the poem that we started off with, or the verse that we started off with at the start of this podcast. This podcast, we've mentioned on a number of occasions that sometimes you can express something a little bit better through ballad, through song, maybe even through art. And in this case, the battle is best told through the form of poem. But before we look again at the poem, we need to look at the man who wrote it. Thomas Davis was an Irish writer, a poet, and a nationalist thinker. He was born in Mallow in Cuimhnigh. He was born in 1840. Now, he was born into an Anglo-Irish Protestant family. He was educated in Trinity College and he studied law, but his real passion was history, culture, and the idea of Ireland as a nation. Even though he was Protestant, Davis believed in an Irish identity that belonged to all who called Ireland home, not to any one faith. He lived in the age of Daniel O'Connell and the repeal movement, which sought to repeal of the Act of Union between Ireland and Britain. Now, O'Connell's campaign was focused on constitutional politics, but Davis wanted something deeper. He wanted a cultural and emotional kind of awakening of Irish identity. This gave rise to the Young Ireland movement. These were a group of writers and activists who used journalism, literature and song to inspire national pride. Davis founded the newspaper The Nation. His own poems, essays and ballads were central to the success of his newspaper. They gave voice to a romantic nationalism that valued memory and imagination as kind of tools of freedom. Now, where I really like Davis is he believed that poetry and song could teach history better than textbooks or speeches. He used verse to make the past emotional and immediate, and we're going to see that with the poem Fontenoy, so that ordinary people could see themselves in Ireland's story. You know, these poems, they celebrated courage, unity, national dignity. You know, some of his famous works, you'll be probably well familiar with a few of them. A Nation Once Again, the song A Nation Once Again, a call for freedom and moral renewal. The West's Asleep, you know, which called for the awakening of the West of Ireland's heroic past. And of course, what we're going to come to again in a second, Fontenoy. And so we come to the poem itself, Fontenoy by Thomas Davis. On many occasions, a work of art. It's romantic, it is to the bone, it cuts hard, it cuts deep, it's memorable. This is one of those. In this poem, it encapsulates the battle at Fontenoy, and Thomas Davis sees it as an opportunity in the same way that the Irish Brigades saw it as an opportunity to gain revenge on those who broke their link with their homeland. Davis sees this battle as an opportunity through poem to reawaken and to praise the idea of Irish nationhood. That even in this far-off flung corner of Europe, in comparison with Ireland, that the Irish can get their revenge, that the Irish still stand strong. And even though the Treaty Stone was broken, that they get their revenge. As the poem says, revenge, remember Limerick, dash down the Sassenagh, Cuimhnigh Luimneach. 6,000 English veterans in stately column tread, their cannon blaze in front and flank, Lord Hayes at their head. Steady they step adown the slope, steady they climb the hill. Steady they load, steady they fire, moving right onward still. Betwixt the wood and Fontenoy, as through a furnace blast, through rampart, trench and palisade, and bullets showering fast. And on the open plain above they rose and kept their course, with ready fire and grim resolve, that mocked at hostile force. Past Fontenoy, while thinner grew their ranks, they break as broke the Zuyder Zee through Holland's ocean banks. More idly than the summer flies, French tirailleurs rush round, as stubble to the lava tide, French squadrons strew the ground. Bombshell and grape and round shot tore, still they marched on and fired. Fast from each volley, grenadier and voltigeur retired. Push on, my household cavalry, King Louis madly cried. To death they rush, but rude their shock, not unavenged they died. On through the camp the column trod, King Louis turns his rein. Not yet, my liege, Saxe interposed, the Irish troops remain. And Fontenoy, famed Fontenoy, had been a Waterloo. Were not those exiles ready then, fresh, vehement, and true? Lord Clare, he says, you have your wish. There are your Saxon foes. The Marshal almost smiles to see, so furiously he goes. How fierce the look these exiles wear, who are wont to be so gay. The treasured wrongs of 50 years are in their hearts today. The treaty broken ere the ink wherewith 'twas writ could dry, their plundered homes, their ruined shrines, their women's parting cry, their priesthood hunted down like wolves, their country overthrown. Each looks as if revenge for all was staked on him alone. On Fontenoy, nor ever yet elsewhere, rushed on to fight a nobler band than those proud exiles were. O'Brien's voice is hoarse with joy, halting he commands. Fix bayonets charge, like mountain storm, rush on these fiery bands. Thin is the English column now, and faint their volleys grow, yet mustering all the strength they have, they make a gallant show. They dress their ranks upon the hill to face the battle wind. Their bayonets the breakers foam like rocks the men behind. One volley crashes from their line, and through the surging smoke, with empty guns clutched in their hands, the headlong Irish broke. On Fontenoy, hark to that fierce huzzah. Revenge, remember Limerick, dash down the Sassenach. Like lions leaping at a fold when mad the hunger's pang, right up against the English line, the Irish exiles sprang. Bright was their steel, 'tis bloody now, their guns are filled with gore. Through shattered ranks and severed files, the trampled flags they tore. The English strove with desperate strength, paused, rallied, staggered, fled. The green hillside is matted close with dying and with dead. Across the plain and far away, passed on that hideous wrack, while Cavalier and Fantassin dash in upon their track. On Fontenoy, like eagles in the sun, with bloody plumes, the Irish stand. The field is fought and won. So, Accordia, we pulled a thread today on this podcast where we started off looking at a crest and what crest and symbolism means, coat of arms, how they visually represent what they stand for. And each one of them has their own story. And just picking on one particular one in this case, the one of Luimneach, we managed to map our way back to a part of history, the Treaty Stone, and from there move to the motto, Cuimhnigh Luimneach, remember the broken Treaty Stone, remember Limerick. And from there we trace it to the Battle of Fontenoy, overseas, where the exiles, the wild geese, got their revenge for the breaking of the Treaty Stone of Limerick. This is a really creative way to remember history or to investigate history. It's a brilliant way to look at how the history of our past still echoes in the present. It's still relevant today, whether it be in the circumstances we see around us, both nationally and internationally, or whether it be something as simple as the crest on a GAA jersey or the crest on a soccer jersey or the colours that a certain team or county wear. Every single one of those things normally has a story behind it, a story that you can delve deep into. And from that delving, make connection after connection after connection after connection. Accordia, it's really, really good to be back. Loving being back up and running. I really thank you all for your shares, your kind words, your support. It means an awful lot to know that there's people who are getting something out of it, that they're enjoying it. If you are enjoying this, if you've enjoyed this particular episode, I'd ask you to do one of the following. Leave a review if it's something that you've enjoyed. Leave a review, it helps with visibility. Share it with a friend who you think might enjoy this type of storytelling or this type of history or this type of podcast, pretty much. Share it with a friend, get it out there. And Accordia, if you would like to be part of this and if you think this project is worth supporting, please do consider contributing on Patreon. This is an ad-free podcast. There's no advertisements in it or during it. We're living in an age maybe where independent podcasting isn't as easy as it once was, maybe to get visibility, shall we say, with the amount of big podcasts that there are now. So if you support independent podcasting and you think that this particular podcast deserves support, please do click on the Patreon and be part of this project, I'd really, really appreciate it. The podcast, wherever you receive it, will remain free. But on the Patreon, I'll try and share bits and pieces linked to the story of the day or the podcast of the week, just in terms of additional visual information. And we'll take it from there. Acordia, thank you so much for being with me on this episode of Undercover Irish. It's a labour of love. And as I said, it's really, really good to be back. Tá sé go chuntach ar fad bheith arás live agus arás sa tiúl. So Acordia, go raibh míle maith agus slán go fóil bígí maith.